Right, this video. Let's see. We have cybersecurity here, or is it just information security? Well, we'll see. Also, nice button-up shirt there, Simon.
At 3:02 in the morning, on February the 24th, 2022, tens of thousands of satellite modems across Europe all went dead simultaneously. There was no explosion or warning, there was just suddenly silence and...
Yeah, that was the hack of the Ukrainian modems. Well, actually, it was not just Ukrainian, it was just a whole set of modems.
An hour later, well, Russian tanks rolled across the Ukrainian
And after
border,
that, shit's
and the
fucking...
world woke up to a special military operation. Most people think wars start when troops cross the border or when planes appear on the horizon. But
Oh, no, it's already started here in Northern Europe as well. Hybrid war is a thing. It starts in social media, unfortunately.
really that comes second. The first part's invisible, and by the time anyone notices it, the damage is done. The Viasat hack knocked out communications for the Ukrainian military right when they needed them most. It also disrupted wind turbines in Germany and internet service across rural France. One cyber attack, launched from a keyboard in Russia, and an entire continent felt it before a single shot was fired.
Well, a little bit before. Also, recently, a certain country felt when their Starlink was cut the fuck off. Because, yeah, Ukraine and Starlink figured out how to block the invading assholes from using it.
This was a plan.
And also Russia blocked Telegram because they're fucking idiots.
And opening move. Modern militaries follow a specific sequence when they go to war. Kind of looks like a checklist. And the targets come in a particular order for particular reasons, and that order tells you a lot about how wars are fought today. So let's go through the checklist, shall we? Target by target in the order that they'd probably be hit, and why each of them matters.
Let's see. I am not a military expert, but I know some sort of this. So, Simon, I will be somewhat critiquing you.
Line them. When we picture wars in our heads, we've got two armies marching toward each other, they meet in a field somewhere, and pop, the fighting begins. Maybe there's a dramatic charge, maybe there's a tense standoff, but the basic idea is that war starts when soldiers from different sides meet. And for most of human history, that was pretty true. Gettysburg, Waterloo, the Somme, armies clashed.
That is not AI, that is
the side with
fucking
more men
real.
or better tactics, or sometimes just dumb luck. One. War was, at its core, a physical meeting of forces, but modern war isn't like that. It starts a lot earlier, with radar stations exploding in the dark hours before any soldier even sees another soldier. If you can blind your enemy's air defenses, you own the sky.
Okay, so he's not going into hybrid warfare. That's fair. But, yeah, it starts a lot before that.
And, well, owning the sky, air superiority, pretty important. On January the 17th, 1991, at 2:38 in the morning, local time,
Apaches will help with that.
64 Apache helicopters flew low over the Saudi desert, so low that their rotor wash kicked up the sand. They were being led to targets by Air Force MH-53J payload helicopters, because the Apache's own navigation systems were just not precise enough for what they needed to do that day. Their mission was to destroy two Iraqi early warning radar stations sitting right on the border. These, of course, weren't random targets. Coalition planners needed a corridor, a 20-mile wide gap in Iraq's radar coverage so that F-117 stealth bombers could slip through and hit Baghdad. The Apaches had to punch that hole open exactly 22 minutes before the F-117s arrived. The pilots had trained on full-scale mock-ups of radar sites for months in the Saudi desert. They had rehearsed the attack about so many times.
So they weren't like Saudi Arabia, just almost neighboring countries. That's kind of interesting.
Times they could practically do it blindfolded. The mission was designated Task Force Normandy, and it was one of the most tightly held operations of the war. Those helicopters fired the first shots at Desert Storm, before the tanks, before the infantry, before anything. The first act of war was destroying the radar. The Apaches handled two specific stations, but the coalition had a much bigger radar problem across the rest of Iraq. The solution was AGM-88 HARM missiles.
Right, those are the ones that seek out, well, radar emissions.
High-speed anti-radar.
That's the air arm in them.
radiation missiles. They home in on radar emissions, which a radar
Yeah,
station
that's-
sends out to detect aircraft and, well, the harms follow that beam to its source. It uses the enemy's own radar against them. Iraqi radar
I've used those in DCS World and in Falcon BMS.
operators figured this out pretty quickly. They learned that when they heard coalition aircraft approaching, the smart move was to shut off their radar immediately. The US military had a dry term for this. They called it radiation avoidance, and it was a brutal choice for every radar operator in Iraq to make. I mean, turn on the system and a harm missile follows your signal back and kills you. Or turn it off and survive, but now you can't see anything else that's coming. Either way, the coalition won. The radar was destroyed or the radar went silent. Both outcomes meant the same thing for Iraqi air defenses. They were blind. Then the F-117 Nighthawk really came into its own. This was an aircraft with a radar cross-section roughly the size of a marble. Now, against a fully operational, well-coordinated air defense network, stealth helps, but it's not magic. But against a network where half the radars are destroyed and the other half are too scared to be turned on, the F-117 was practically invisible. 42 of them deployed for Desert Storm. They represented about 2.5% of coalition combat aircraft,
I still like the
but they
8 and
struck roughly 40% of designated strategic targets. That ratio only makes sense when you understand that the air defense network had already been torn apart before those jets ever took off. This also isn't just a 1991 story. In October 2024, when Israel struck targets inside Iran, the first things they hit were the S-300 air defense batteries
And S-300s are like fairly recent. I think it's like that's like the best ones they got. I don't know if Iran has 400s.
protecting Tehran. Specifically, the battery sitting at Imam Khomeini International Airport. Earlier that same year in April, Israeli strikes had destroyed the air defense radar guarding the Natanz nuclear facility. Different decade, different countries, different technology, same logic.
Same
Before you hit
strategy.
anything else, you kill the thing that can see you coming. In any modern combat, it's pretty much the same. You destroy the enemy's ability to detect what's coming next. You can't shoot down what you can't see. Every modern war starts by making the enemy blind.
And where are we
Death
going
in
with
them.
this?
Most of us assume that modern militaries are built to survive some sort of communication attack. There's redundant systems, backup headquarters, decentralized authority. The whole system is basically designed so that no single strike can cripple the network. And that assumption does make sense because military doctrine since World War II has been working toward it. But there is a gap between what militaries plan for and what they actually end up building. Redundancy is really, really expensive. It requires duplicative infrastructure, parallel chains of commands, and constant training for scenarios where the primary system goes down. In practice, most nations centralize because it's just cheaper and faster. One fiber optic backbone is easier to maintain than 5 fiber optic backbones. One air defense command tower coordinates better than 20 regional ones acting independently. That's the weakness the United States exploited on January the 17th, 1991. Among the first targets of Operation Desert Storm were Iraq's communication nodes in downtown Baghdad. Those F-117 stealth fighters we mentioned in the last entry dropped precision-guided munitions on the Al-Qarq telecommunications center. The Iraqi Air Force headquarters was struck in the same opening wave, so was Saddam Hussein's fiber optic network, the backbone connecting his centralized air defense system to radar installations and missile batteries across the country. Within just 24 hours, Iraq's integrated air defense command was non-functional. Local commanders still had their equipment. They had surface-to-air missiles and radar stations and anti-aircraft guns, but they didn't have any orders. They couldn't coordinate.
Yeah. Both modern-day Iran and Finland as well. Finland has quite a redundant thing. So yeah, whenever Russia attacks us, which I suppose is inevitable unless we have Putin and some of his cronies die off, which wouldn't be something I shed a tear over. Yeah, it's gonna happen.
With their neighboring units, and they couldn't report what they were seeing or request any support. Each site essentially became an island, reacting to whatever flew overhead without any sense of the larger picture. Now, the architect behind all of this was Colonel John Warden III, and he'd been thinking about this problem for years. Warden ran an Air Force strategy office called Checkmate, and he had developed something called the 5-ring model. Imagine 5 concentric circles. The outermost ring is fielded forces, the tanks, the infantry, the ships. Moving inward, you get population, then infrastructure, then organic essentials, energy, key production, etc. And at the very center, you've got leadership. Traditional warfare works from the outside in.
That
You
didn't
engage
work
the
like
enemy's
that,
fielded
didn't it?
forces, grind through their armies, push toward the capital, and eventually the leadership surrenders or collapses. It is bloody and slow. That is how war has mostly been done for centuries. Warden flipped that logic. His argument was straightforward. Attack the inner rings, and the outer rings collapse on their own. Take out a leadership's ability to communicate and command, and those fielded forces become a collection of disconnected units with no strategic direction. You do not need to destroy the enemy's army if you can cut its communication and command off. This plan was called Instant Thunder, and the name was deliberate. During Vietnam, the American air campaign was called Rolling Thunder, a strategy of gradual escalation designed to slowly increase pressure on North Vietnam.
And well, they tried this shit in this decade. I don't know if it really worked.
It ran for 3.5 years, and, well, it failed. Warden didn't want it to fail, he wanted the opposite. Instant Thunder proposed striking 84 strategic targets in just 6 days. There was no gradual ramp-up or signaling intentions, just overwhelming force against the nodes that held everything together. And that worked. The coalition flew over 100,000 sorties during Desert Storm, but the war's outcome was largely decided in those opening hours. Once Iraq's command and control network went dark, everything else was just clean up. Iraqi units that tried to fight did so without coordination, without intelligence, without really any understanding of where coalition forces actually were. Units that might have mounted a serious defense, they instead sat in position, waiting for orders that were never going to arrive. The Gulf War really proved something that military planners have taken seriously ever since, that a military with functioning weapons but no communication is less dangerous than one with worse weapons and a working communication network. Iraq had the 4th largest army in the world back in 1991. They had modern Soviet equipment, battle-hardened troops from the Iran-Iraq War,
modern-ish.
and fortified positions that had months to prepare. But none of that matters. The weapons don't matter if nobody can tell them what the f to shoot at.
And where go with
Isolate them. The power grid. If you wanted to know...
Yeah, this is where we are kind of at right now. Well, we'll see how the 2 weeks go.
knock out a country's electricity, you'd bomb the power plants. That's the obvious move, isn't it? Power stations, they're big, they're visible, and they are where electricity gets
the water.
Take them out, lights go off. Brilliant. And for most of military history, that's exactly what air forces did. They hit generators, turbine halls, boiler rooms, the logic being simple and largely correct. Destroy the thing that makes the power, and there's no more power. But there's a problem with that logic. Power plants, even badly damaged ones, can be patched back together surprisingly fast. Ukraine proved this over and over in 2022 and 2023. Russia would hit a thermal power station with cruise missiles, and Ukrainian engineers would have it producing electricity again within a few days, sometimes within hours. The generators themselves, they're really tough, modular, and repairable. You can fly in parts, weld things together, and get turbines spinning again, apparently just with duct tape and determination. So Russia kept hitting the same stations, and Ukraine kept fixing those same stations, and the whole thing turned into a really expensive game of whack-a-mole. Then Russia changed its approach, and the results were devastating. Starting in late 2023 and accelerating through 2024, Russian strikes shifted away from the power plants themselves and towards something much more vulnerable: large power transformers, or LPTs. These are the massive units that step voltage up or down so that electricity can travel across the national grid. These things weigh over 400 tons each. They take 12 to 18 months to manufacture, and they cost between $5 and $10 million each. And there are only a handful of factories in the entire world that can build these things. You can't repair an LPT in a field with spare parts and that duct tape we mentioned previously. When one is destroyed, it's gone. The replacement's sitting in a production queue somewhere in Europe or South Korea, months away from delivery. Russia also figured out something about nuclear power. Ukraine gets roughly half its electricity from nuclear plants, and you obviously can't bomb a nuclear reactor. The consequences would be catastrophic, and the international response would be immediate. But you don't have to touch the reactor at all. You just have to destroy the substation that connects it to the grid. The plant keeps running perfectly fine, the fuel rods stay cool, the turbines keep on spinning. It just can't send power anywhere, which power stations need to do. And this really wasn't a new idea. back in the Gulf War again. Basically a bit about the Gulf War, isn't it? In 1991, coalition planners figured out the same thing about Iraq's grid. They deliberately avoided destroying power plants because those are expensive and time-consuming to rebuild. Instead, they hit transformer yards and switching stations. They used carbon fiber bombs that draped conductive filaments across electrical equipment, shorting everything out. The plants survived intact, which made post-war reconstruction easier. But during the war itself, Iraq's electrical grid was completely non-functional.
I wish they could use that for Iran, but I don't know. Does it work?
In any electrical system isn't generation. It's the transmission and distribution of the electricity. A country can have all the power plants in the world, but if the grid connecting them to cities and factories is destroyed, those plants are just expensive buildings making electricity that goes nowhere. Ukraine has started adapting to this. Engineers are moving critical grid components underground where they can't be hit by cruise missiles or drones. The government's pushing hard for decentralized power generation, smaller solar installations, local generators, distributed systems that don't depend on a handful of massive transformers sitting exposed in open substations. It's a rethinking of how a national grid should be structured when you're at war. But that adaptation takes years.
We are also actually we have been doing that in Finland, putting shit underground for quite a while.
And it highlights something most countries haven't really grappled with yet. Modern electricity grids were designed for efficiency, not for resilience. They concentrate critical equipment in a small number of locations because that's cheaper and easier to manage. It makes sense. Those large power transformers, though, they are the linchpins of the whole system. And in most countries, they're sitting in fenced yards with no meaningful protection against a military strike. So the target is the thing that moves the power. And right now, in virtually every country on Earth, those transformers are standing in open fields completely exposed.
Okay.
Silence them. Undersea cables and satellites.
Yeah, we've had that.
Now, we often talk about the internet like it's something ethereal. This is in the cloud. There's data floating around in the ether, bouncing between servers scattered across the globe. Feels largely correct, doesn't it? It's distributed, it's resilient, and it feels like it's everywhere and nowhere at once. And that's...
To be fair, the internet in itself is pretty fucking resilient. But let's see where Sam goes with this.
Story made sense for a really long time because the internet was designed to survive a nuclear war. But that leaves something out.
Yeah.
About 95% of all international internet traffic travels through roughly 570 physical cables lying on the ocean floor. That's it. These aren't some high-tech marvels either. They're about the width of a garden hose,
and
they
sharks
can sit
bite
on the
them.
seabed, sometimes buried in shallow water, sometimes just resting in the open depths at several kilometers. The cloud is very physical in places, and in those places, it's pretty exposed. We got a preview of what attacking undersea infrastructure looked like in September 2022. Someone detonated explosives along the Nord Stream pipeline in the Baltic Sea, rupturing 3 of 4 lines carrying natural gas from Russia to Germany. The pipeline sat in relatively shallow water, about 70 to 80 meters deep, in one of the most heavily surveilled bodies of water on Earth, and still, nobody stopped it. Now consider that Russia's GUGI, the main directorate of deep-sea research, operates a fleet of specialized submarines built for deep-sea operations. They are designed to work on the ocean floor, and Western intelligence agencies have watched them mapping the routes of undersea cables connecting Europe and North America. NATO responded by ramping up submarine patrols near critical cable choke points, but the ocean is, surprise, very big. And those cables are, another surprise, very long. So the internet has this physical vulnerability that most people don't really think about. But communication doesn't just run underwater, it also runs through space, and space is also getting more dangerous. In January 2007, China launched a missile that destroyed its own Fengyang 1C weather satellite at an altitude of 865 kilometers. It was a proof of concept, a demonstration that Beijing could take out satellites in orbit. That single test created more than 2,600 pieces of trackable debris, and most of it still up there, circling the Earth at thousands of kilometers per hour. Russia followed in November 2021, destroying its own Cosmos 1408 satellite and generating over 1,500 additional debris fragments. The crew aboard the ISS had to shelter in their emergency escape capsules because the debris cloud was passing dangerously close. You don't even need to blow anything up here. GPS jamming and spoofing have become routine in certain parts of the world. Russia has been disrupting GPS signals across the Baltic Sea, the Black Sea, and the Eastern Mediterranean for years now. Thousands of civilian passenger flights have reported navigation anomalies. Commercial aviation can work around it, but military operations can't as easily. Modern precision-guided munitions depend on GPS to find their targets.
even had
GPS-guided
Ukrainian
bomb without a
drones.
signal becomes a real
Yeah, we even have Ukrainian drones spoofed to go to Finland. So yeah, Russia is fucking shit up.
dumb bomb that's really expensive, heading in roughly the right direction. The revolution in precise warfare that has defined the last 3 decades of American military dominance rests on a constellation of satellites that everyone now knows how to threaten. The US Naval Academy quietly reintroduced celestial navigation into its curriculum a few years ago. Midshipmen are learning to use sextants again, reading star positions to determine where they are in the ocean, which is scary and also cool. Because if GPS goes dark, a $100 million warship still needs to know its location, and the only backup that doesn't rely on satellites or cables or anything electronic is the stars. We built the most connected civilization in human history, with information moving at the speed of light across oceans and through orbit. But all of that connectivity runs through these physical choke points that a sufficiently motivated adversary can cut, jam, or just blow the fuck up. The most connected society in history is also, of course, the most vulnerable to disconnection.
Well, that is actually all of humanity at this point. It's just not the people that are rattling their sabers or measuring up their dicks. It was always that. It was like that in the Cold War. It's still that right now.
Cripple them before they know. Now, for most of recent history, cyber attacks felt like a bit of a nuisance. Stolen emails, defaced websites, ransomware demands that blocked up a hospital's billing system for a few days. Annoying and expensive, yes, but nobody was dying and nothing was actually blowing up.
Well, in the case of the hospitals, people were actually dying.
And that made sense, because what we saw publicly really was just digital vandalism, wasn't it? Hackers wanted money or attention.
Are we
or
going to
both.
NotPetya?
Governments talked
Please
about
mention
cyber
NotPetya.
threats in vague, ominous terms, but the examples they pointed to were always about data, stolen credit
NotPetya.
cards, leaked personnel files, that sort of thing. Embarrassing? Maybe. Annoying? Yes. Physical explosions? No. The physical world and the digital world seemed to be pretty separate. But then came Stuxnet.
Well,
In 2010, security
different
researchers stumbled across a piece of malware unlike anything they had ever
okay, so they're going with the Western one before the Eastern one.
seen. It was sophisticated, clearly the work of a nation state, and it had one very specific target: the programmable logic controllers running uranium enrichment centrifuges at Iran's Natanz nuclear facility. The malware told those centrifuges to spin roughly 40% faster than their design speed, and while the machines were tearing themselves apart, the monitoring displays in the control room showed completely normal readings. The operators watched their screens and saw nothing wrong. Iran destroyed about 1,000 centrifuges before anyone figured out what was happening. The whole thing
And it was just because of one mole. I know of this.
only came to light because Stuxnet accidentally spread beyond Natanz's air-gapped network to computers it was never supposed to reach. Without that mistake, we still might not know about it. The US and Israel had jointly built a weapon that caused physical destruction inside a foreign military facility without firing a shot or crossing a border. And that was the moment the definition of warfare changed. Now, Stuxnet was pretty
It
precise,
changed
but what
before.
came next, not so much. In December 2015, Russian hackers used malware
there
called
it
Black
is.
to take down sections of Ukraine's power
Oh, okay.
grid. About 230,000
Well, that
customers
was
lost
whatever.
electricity. It was the first confirmed cyber attack in history to shut down critical infrastructure. They did it again the following year, hitting a transmission station near Kyiv. But these were really just rehearsals. And when the real thing came,
Yeah,
the cyber attack
there it is.
wasn't a sideshow. It was the opening act that we indeed opened our video with today. In January 2022, weeks before any tanks moved, Russia deployed Whispergate wiper malware across Ukrainian government systems. More than 60 government websites went dark simultaneously. That was the softening. Then at 3:02 a.m. on February the 24th, the Viasat satellite
was-
hit. Tens of thousands of satellite modems were bricked simultaneously across Europe. Ukrainian military communication went down, and as collateral damage, about 5,000 wind turbines in Germany were knocked offline because they happened to use the same satellite.
Get to the main
network.
part.
An hour later, Russian ground forces crossed the border. They'd wiped out their enemy's communication, they'd hit government systems, knocked out satellite coverage, and that was when they sent in the armor. The cyber attacks were part of the invasion this time. They were the first phase. Now, Ukraine actually did hold up pretty well on the cyber front, partly because they've been dealing with Russian digital attacks for years, and
he's not even gonna mention Petya. Okay. Boo.
had hardened their systems. But the playbook was clear, and every military on Earth was taking notes. Cyber weapons have a feature conventional weapons don't. They can be pre-positioned. Traditional military's got to mobilize troops, move equipment, build up their supply lines, that sort of thing. And satellites can watch all of that happening. But malware can sit inside a power grid or a water treatment system or a financial network for months or even years, just doing nothing, remaining completely invisible, just waiting for one signal to turn on and wreak havoc. Security researchers have a term for these. They call them implants, and they find new ones regularly in critical infrastructure across dozens of countries. Sometimes they can attribute them to a specific government. Sometimes they can't. The first shot in the next major war has probably already been fired. It may be sitting dormant in a server rack somewhere, in a power station, or a water utility place, or a banking system, just waiting. And we won't know about it until someone sends the activation signal. The sequence. Okay, so let's put all of this together, shall we? Modern war starts quietly. Weeks before any missile flies, cyber operatives are already underway. Malware is in power grids, communication networks, financial systems, just waiting. The enemy doesn't know the war started yet, and that's the point. Then comes the first minutes. Cruise missiles and stealth aircraft hit radar installations and surface-to-air missile sites. This is SEED, the suppression of enemy air defenses. In this phase, you're trying to open the way so everything else can move through it. Within the first hours, the targets shift to command and control. Military headquarters, communication hubs, the nodes where generals talk to their forces in the field. Cut those links, and a million-man army becomes disconnected units with no orders and no picture of what's happening around them. Over the first few days, you go after the enemy's airfields, aircraft shelters, fuel depots. You're establishing air superiority, and once you own the sky, everything the enemy does on the ground becomes visible and vulnerable. Then come the first weeks. Power plants, telephone exchanges, bridges, rail yards. You're dismantling the country's ability to sustain a war effort.
Yep.
Troops can't fight if they can't eat, move, or communicate with anyone above or beside them. And while you're hitting fielded forces throughout, the ground offensive waits until the raiders are blind, the generals are cut off, the airfields are craters, and the grid is dark. The Gulf War proved this sequence works. The coalition achieved air superiority in a week. They flew over 100,000 sorties and dropped 88,500 tons of bombs across 39 days. Iraq had roughly 500,000 troops in the theater. By the time the coalition ground offensive began on the 24th of February, that army was severely degraded and in many sectors barely functional. The ground war lasted 100 hours. The wars you see on television, tanks rolling through cities, infantry clearing buildings, rubble, smoke, etc.
Why didn't they
They're often wars
mention
where the shape was set much earlier. The decisive moments happened way before, in fiber
Fine.
optic cables and server rooms and radar dishes on remote hilltops that nobody had ever heard of. Every modern military on Earth is studying this same sequence right now. They're reading the same case studies, running the same simulations, building the same capabilities, because the logic is clear and the results are really hard to ignore. So the question is really whether your country's ready for someone to use that chain on you. Thank you for watching.
Interesting video. It lacked quite a few things though. But I suppose it's so okay. Well, I mentioned the other thing. Main thing is like, why would you not mention not Petya or Petya? Simon, you need to reprimand at least one of your writers. But yeah. Information warfare is real, hybrid warfare is real. It is what it is.